Okay, so for this demo, I'm going to show you guys how to ink up the block and do a proof, right? So I have the little guy from before. This is the material you guys are going to be cutting with. It's easy cut block, so it's like a little rubber stamp, right? So I finished carving out the little line. With this stuff, it's really easy to kind of get through the material very quickly. So this is why we're using this. But I also finished cutting out my linoleum pieces. So this is more of the tessellation that I showed you in the transfer the design process video. And you can see that I have all the details cut out, right? So all of this open space I did after I kind of went around all of the details. And you can see that I cut it down. Now, are they 100% matching? No. They're a little bit off, right? So, you know, you're only human, I'm only human, we do the best that we can. So we're gonna hope that this prints out. But I'm gonna show you this guy first. And so I've got two different kinds of papers. I've got some newsprint that I'm gonna practice on. We always proof on newsprint because it's non-archival, you don't feel as bad if you have to mess up. And the reason we proof is to make sure that our design is the way it is before we go on to actually make the print. I also have a piece of rag paper here. It's a little bit smaller than what you guys are going to be printing with, but just for the demo's sake. So I'm going to kind of do everything here. So if you see me peel away my palette paper full of ink, that's why, because, you know, I can only get my camera up so high. But I've got relief ink here, Speedball. This is waterproof. Ugh. Of course, I put it on a little tight. It's not waterproof, excuse me, it's water-based, is what I should say. So I'm gonna scoop out a little bit of ink. Now, surprisingly, even though like the acrylic ink, it's gonna dry really fast, so it's kind of like you're gonna get out what you think you need, and you can always add more, but don't like gloop it out everywhere. So, you know, that's probably gonna be enough for my demo purposes. I'm gonna kind of squidge it all out, set that there. I'm a really messy painter. And just messy artists in general. So you're gonna see me get ink all over my hands. It's not what I want you to do, but you know, here we are. All right, so I have my ink out. Now, if it's not being used, you can kind of leave it globbed. You're gonna slow out the drying process. I also have some materials we can add to it, right? So there's like a transparent base and an ink extender for this acrylic ink that's gonna help slow down the drying process a little bit. But you can kind of card it out like this. Now I have a palette knife. You can pretty much use anything. I'm gonna kind of scrape. And so, flip this over. This is a brayer, right? So I'm gonna just kind of work the ink back and forth. What you don't wanna hear is like a super tacky, icky sound. You guys can see how that streaks through. You wanna kind of card out the ink or work out the ink. You wanna hear that soft kind of like swishy sound. I know that's kind of crazy to hear for a sound, but you don't want to over ink the block, especially with these little rubber guys. If you over ink the block, you're going to kind of it'll squish into your design easier. And then, you know, we're not going to have a happy time. But you can see that this brayer is much bigger than my little guy here. So just a couple of passes. I like to kind of turn my block, go back and forth, kind of lifting off. And you can see that it has ink without being over ink. You don't want to squish ink down in. So I'm not pushing down with my brayer, I'm just inking the surface. So I'm going to leave that there. Maybe. Just going to take this over here. So I'm going to tape this up just a little bit so you guys can see me stamp on my page. You know, in theory, this was going to work a lot easier. But here we are. Just gonna tuck that little bad boy there for right now. So I got my little stamp. I'm gonna take a sheet of newsprint. Now I'm just testing this, so there's a couple different things you can do. When it comes to these, you can kind of place them. It's gonna be a lot easier for you to place them on the paper, which can, you know, it's a little harder to kind of squish down, but I'm gonna gently place. With these, the best thing about them, especially with this one, because he's so small, it's 1.5 inches, just kind of applying firm pressure. Now, what I don't want to do is like anything that looks like this. If you do that, kind of this like rubbing, make sure you have one hand firmly on the back of the block, kind of tap in, squish, squish, squish. Now, I will tell you that the first pull, this is 100% why I proof. It's usually the hardest, so the ink might not be as thick, but there we go. Right? Ta-da! He's super cute. I love him already. Let me kind of get into my ink here. I wonder if we can just do this. Bear with. There we go. Kind of a twofer here. All right, gonna ink my block back up. Now you do have to ink it up every time, but notice I'm not gonna clean my block off right now, especially when you're printing patterns, you can just kind of go for it. Right, so you guys can still see that this is here. Now with the registration, because this is a square, I can pretty much just line it up. Add some pressure. You guys can see that I'm actually pushing pretty hard. There's nothing like pulling up a block and it's not fully black, right? Ta-da! Right, super fun. So I could continue this all the way around, but what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna show you the tessellation. Another tessellation. So ideally I would wash this immediately. I have a couple spray bottles in my studio, so I'm just gonna kind of take it over here to my other stand, spray a little water on it so it doesn't, you don't want the ink to dry on the block. All right, so I'm gonna move this back. I'm gonna take my paper away. I'm gonna ink up first this guy, right? So this is just the solid tessellation block for the solid color. Now, of course, this is the best opportunity to play with color, right? So if you're doing a solid pattern like this, you can play with doing, you know, repeating patterns of color. You can do a single color and leave the negative space. That takes a little bit more planning, but I can definitely help you with that. So notice how I'm working back and forth, and you can see that there's some stubborn spots, so you have to be careful with your brayer. You don't want to get in the outer edges because I don't want that to print. But it is kind of hard to print a flat color, I will tell you that. So the larger your piece, the harder it is to print that flat color. So I'm going to kind of, roll my tape back over. This is a very dangerous thing. If only, right? Okay. So I've got this guy. I'm going to lay him down. Now you do want clean fingers. Now this is going to be a little bit harder. So I'm going to grab a spoon, right? I'm going to have some of these in class. And I'm going to spoon print the back of this. Now with the rubber stamps, you really probably shouldn't need to do this. Just your hand is enough. But you can kind of go around to each section. The spoon just kind of gives you a little bit more concentrated pressure. But you can also just kind of sometimes I tap it with my hand, which is, it's a little archaic, but here we are. I'm just going to lift up a little corner. Now you guys can see, I'm just going to pull this just to show you. This comes from not enough pressure. It could also come from some of the ink, like maybe the block isn't inked up. And I told you, especially with a shape like this, having the block ink up the first time perfectly is almost like non-existent, which is why we always proof before we start. So I'm going to re-ink this, but it does come from not enough pressure, right? So when I say you guys have to put a lot of pressure, you really should put quite a bit of pressure, right? Especially if you're trying to print something flat like this. Now again, with the easy cuts, you probably shouldn't have to do this. Probably shouldn't, keyword, probably. Kind of put that there. I know I'm getting ink all over that piece of paper, but here we are. All right. I'm going to try to connect my design here. If I can remember. There it is. Okay. So it should connect. Try for this guy. Should connect just like that. Keyword should. Now the registration is going to be a little tricky. Not going to lie. So if they don't quite meet up and it's not perfect, don't worry about it, right? You can see that there's some wiggle here. It's all just about the learning process and more about the act of printing and just learning a new medium, playing around with it, than having it be perfect. Because what you can do is in post-production, like I'm happy with the shape, but maybe not the way it filled in. I can go in with different materials, maybe add collages, add drawn details with pens, markers, paint. Anything. All right, so I'm going to really bear down. It's usually the middle and the edges, like the very, very outer edges, that are the hardest to print. All right. It's a little bit better. Ta-da! You can see where it lines up. You see I have a little bit of gaps, but they do kind of connect pretty closely, right? I have to say that's not terrible. Bear with. So I just popped that in a water bucket I have. I'm going to print that other one next just so you guys can see how maybe even doing both a kind of full flat shape, like you saw me print just a minute ago, and also a design shape, right? So this is the one where I took my tessellated shape and I added a bunch of detail to it. Ooh. All right. So with an open design like this, where it's a lot of detail and you're not necessarily, it's more like line drawings, right? You can see that sometimes you'll get some ink in these open spaces. There's a couple ways to work around that. Just really kind of, you want to load the ink without putting too much pressure. That's why you see me working kind of back and forth and almost lifting off as I hit the edges. But you can also just take a damp towel and just wipe it out. That's what happens. You guys can see I have a little ink on my fingers. I usually have a lot more. But here we are. All right, so continuing this, always takes me a minute. Also helps if you label the back of your design, like what's the top, what's the bottom. You're gonna find that this process is a lot easier. All right, so, aha. So I'm going for this guy next. Now you can see that I have just that little bit of edge, so I try to do just about like, not even a full quarter inch, right? So I can get pretty close. I'm fine if this overlaps a little bit, but I know that that's about where this should be. Keyword about. Now remember, the first pass is always the hardest. And again, you guys shouldn't really have to use the spoon printing with the rubber stamps, but I will definitely have them there. You just kind of circle motion. Notice how my other hand's always on the block. I don't want to take anything off and then rub, because your block might twist and then your ink will smear, and that sucks. Because it does take a little bit of time for your ink to dry. It's not like acrylic paint. It does kind of dry at a little slower of a rate, even the acrylic ink, so. Kind of massaging this in. Now you guys can see what I mean when the design prints backwards, right? It's not terrible. I'm okay with that. It's pretty cute. Let's do one more pull. Open up my palette of ink. And you see that that just is lifting up because of the palette itself. I don't have that tacked down. Don't worry, acrylic ink does come off people. I will tell you that. It won't come off your clothes though, so you know. During this process, I definitely wear your least favorite outfit, because you might not be messy, but your neighbor might be, so. All right, gonna do this one more pass. I'm gonna come up here. Well, no, I'm gonna connect down here. So I'm gonna do this one again. You know, you can kind of line it up. Ooh. About there. You know, and sometimes you might miss. That's fine. Just making sure you can see. All right, back to the spoon printing. Now with the rubber stamps, you don't want to push too hard. This linoleum, you know, is pretty durable even with the wovenness, so I'm pretty rough with that because I know I'm not gonna really hurt this block. But with the rubber stamps, really it just should take the back side of your heel and maybe you're just a little tapping, but you could gently just apply pressure and rub that spoon on. But I find also, like, usually the heel of my hand will do just fine. The only reason I'm not doing it is the camera's in the way. All right. Ooh. All right, so you can see I lost a little bit of my line here, and that's because the ink squished in. That's what happens when you over ink your block a little bit. It happens, even with me. You know, I've been printing a long time. So printmaking is really a trial and error process. You just got to be okay with some things coming out, some things not coming out. That's the general idea. I'm going to print one more time just to show you what it looks like on a sheet of NASA paper. So you guys are going to get rag paper too. It's a little, you can print on your Bristol board, but the rag paper is going to do just fine as well. You can print on almost anything. With this acrylic ink, you know, it's not like washable safe, but you can print on fabric, cardboard, glass, just, you know, not everything's archival. All right, so inked up my block again. I know it's a little over inked at this point. If that does happen, all you have to do is wash the block, dab it dry, and just keep going. All right, so I got my nice paper. Now I'm still not gonna put it on top because I know with our process that we're really gonna be working, you know, trying to make that pattern design. Mute point. All right, but I'm gonna kind of place this guy in the middle. Now you do want clean fingers when you print, so if you do have this kind of thing, it might be nice to have like a little bit of water cup, or just go quickly, rinse your hands off, and then come back. You don't want excess ink on your nice rag paper. Now the newsprint, to me, that's fair game, but because that's practice, right? It's kind of like what it'll look at, and so what it'll look like, it's like proofing. But if you want to play around with color, do it in newsprint first, and then move to your nicer paper. And you could always add color in later with other materials. Now I'm going to be doing this in class too, so if you can't quite get what I'm doing with the video, don't worry. All right. Now I will tell you that the rag paper, it does take a little bit more pressure usually to get that ink to come off. You can see, nice and cute, right? So that's the quick and dirty of the printing process. Now we're using palette paper to ink up so there's no like scraping, but if for, you know, to get the ink back, if I had any excess, and I really don't at this point, it's all kind of squished out, you could take your palette knife, cart it back in. But that's the general idea. And you can see that, you know, I could have wiped my block a little bit here to get some of those spots where the ink touched, and that just, what that shows me is I could just work in with my liner cutter and cut some more of that out. I'm pretty happy with how this looks, despite the little line here, but all I gotta do is go back in and like cut that a little bit bigger, right? So general idea of the ink process. Good luck.